hopefully we'll have Chair Collins and Vice Chair Murray here momentarily or sometime during this meeting as the other members of the subcommittee as we review the fiscal year 2026 budget request for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Secretary Turner, it's my pleasure to welcome you to your very first hearing before this subcommittee. And I just want to thank you for your willingness, how energetic you are in getting things done, and it's just been a pleasure. I've enjoyed our previous conversations, and I'm so impressed by your diverse backgrounds as your work as a pastor, an athlete, and a Texas legislator, to your leadership on opportunity zones and your nonprofit work supporting children in poverty. How you found time to do all of this and to accomplish all of this while being a husband and a father is pretty impressive. Your energy and leadership will be needed as the HUD budget faces a time of uncertainty. As we kick off the FY26 process, I want to highlight that Congress does not have a top-line discretionary budget agreement in place at this time. As a result, the House and Senate will likely produce bills with very different overall spending levels that will need to be reconciled later. Meanwhile, existing home sales fell this spring, the lowest April numbers since 2009, according to the National Association of Realtors. Sluggish home sales and high interest rates suggest that the subcommittee can't rely on strong FHA and Ginnie Mae receipts to offset the CBO score of our bill. And of course, the cost of maintaining existing rental assistance continues to increase, driven by insufficient inventory of affordable housing across the entire country. These housing challenges must be balanced against competing demands in the transportation space, including aviation safety. As for navigating these funding challenges, I think it's fair to say that OMB did not do you any favors with their request for HUD of $43.5 billion in new spending. This request is $33.6 billion, or 43.6% below the current funding levels. Despite the funding reduction, I'm delighted to see the request continue support for the Foster Youth Independent Living Initiative. This crucial funding ensures that when youth exiting foster care are at risk of homelessness, that they have access to a Section 8 voucher to help stabilize their housing situation. I hope that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will join me in recognizing the importance of this particular funding and the need to continue assisting youth as they transition out of foster care. As much as I look forward to supporting the request, for FYI, I do have several concerns with the border request. The largest concern, of course, is the proposal to consolidate HUD's rental assistance program, tenant and project-based Section 8 public housing, housing for the elderly, and housing for persons with disabilities into one single block grant. Combined, these programs serve approximately 4.5 million households, the majority of whom are elderly and disabled. There are a lot of concerns that losing this assistance would place those residents at significant likelihood of homelessness. The proposed single block grant would leave it to states alone to determine how HUD funds will be spent. Suddenly replacing current partnerships with local housing authority and contracts with private owners risk undermining HUD's existence. Although this new block grant proposal requires statutory changes from the authorizers, the budget request assumes those changes have already been made and requests $2.7 billion below the current funding level for these programs. With this proposal, OMB appears to be putting the cart before the horse. Separately, the request proposes the elimination of the popular effective Community Development Block Grant Program. The CDBG program enjoys strong bipartisan support because it provides flexible funding for critical investments serving low and moderate income communities across the country. This essential resource for state and local governments lies at the heart of HUD, Community Development Mission. And at a time when there's a need to increase the supply of affordable housing, the budget request eliminates the home program and the critical role it serves in providing gap financing to countless housing projects every year. I was also disappointed to see the request eliminate the Section 4 and SHOP programs, which grow local nonprofit capacity and use sweat equity models to promote home ownership. Additionally, when we should be making even stronger commitments to lifting up the least among us and ending cycles of poverty and dependency, eliminating the family self-sufficiency and Ross programs appear to be penny-wise and pound-foolish, especially if Congress adopts a rental assistance block grant proposal. There's a danger to pulling on a loose thread. I'm concerned about the broader risk across federal housing programs, not only at HUD, but also at USDA and at Treasury. It feels like we're pulling on multiple loose threads without a clear vision of what comes next. While I understand and share the administration's concerns about rising costs and shrinking revenues, the uncertainty created by these proposals increases risk, and risk raises cost. The cost of uncertainty is reflected in the cost of materials, of labor, and other times it is reflected in either fewer housing units or even entire projects being built. Managing these risks and uncertainties should be addressed with careful thought and deliberation. As former HUD Secretary Dr. Ben Carson has often pointed out, a people without a vision will perish. The committee stands ready to work with HUD to identify a path forward to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the programs we fund within the constraints we have to operate. Reducing undue regulatory burdens and lowering the cost of housing production are two examples of where Congress and the administration can identify early successes to build on. I look forward to working with Ranking Member Gillibrand and the rest of our colleagues in writing a fiscally responsible HUD bill this year, one that seeks to meet the needs of all Americans across the country. Secretary Turner, once again, thank you for appearing before the committee today, and I look forward to your testimony and to continue these important conversations. And now I'll turn to Ranking Member Gillibrand for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Hyde-Smith. Thank you, Secretary Turner, for joining us today. And thank you for our discussion yesterday. I really appreciate it. Housing affordability, as you and I discussed, is a huge problem across the country. Whether in a red state or a blue state, a big city or a suburb, housing is just too expensive, and it's time that we did something about it. On day one, President Trump signed an executive order directing agencies to take, quote, appropriate actions to lower the cost of housing and expand housing supply, end of quote. I think we can all agree on that goal. But I worry that the administration's actions are making things worse. In fact, the president's tariffs and trade wars are making housing less affordable. Just an example from my state of New York, when you have a tariff on Canada, we get most of our wood for building new houses from Canada, and so that's just automatically going to raise your housing costs, and notwithstanding many multiples of other parts of the supply chain. At HUD, the funding freezes, delays, and contract and grant terminations have sent service providers scrambling to keep supporting residents. Housing providers and homeless shelters have struggled to pay rent on millions of housing units and make payroll. Many have had to draw on costly lines of credit, spending funds that should be spent on supporting residents. HUD is struggling to meet the most basic responsibilities after losing 2,300 employees through the deferred resignation program. All of this has created new challenges for private developers, public housing authorities, and our communities. To make matters worse, now the administration is trying to cut HUD in half. The 2026 budget requests cuts rental and homelessness assistance by over $27 billion, sets time limits on assistance, and kicks responsibility for vulnerable families to the states without any detail about how that transition is going to happen. 10% of all residential rental units are supported by HUD rental assistance. That's 5 million residential units that are worth an estimated of $900 billion. Over 500,000 of those units are in New York. HUD assistance is baked into the long-term financial stability of those properties. So if we just pull the rug out from under those renters, landlords, and property owners without any recourse, we're going to create serious economic ripples. On top of these cuts, the budget does nothing to address the funding cliff for 58,000 households that were able to escape homelessness and intimate partner violence through the emergency housing voucher program, including 9,400 who live in New York. I've visited some of those shelters. Some of them are the most life-saving, productive, helpful shelters we have for women and their children. The president wants to expand housing supply, but instead of investing in housing production, the budget eliminates funding for CDBG and home investment partnership programs. So the question is how will this administration increase the number of pieces of housing and units available? The first Trump administration's HUD budgets were all rejected by Congress on a bipartisan basis, and I expect that will happen again. Are HUD's housing programs perfect? We agree, no. I agree with you that we should focus on working together to improve them. But given the millions of lives at stake, we need to be thoughtful and deliberative. As we move forward with today's discussion about the fiscal year 26 budget, I want to remind us all of the important things that HUD does and who HUD helps. HUD assistance helps over 10 million Americans keep a roof over their head. 9 out of 10 households are elderly, disabled, or working families. It helps address the dire housing needs in Indian country. The Federal Housing Administration makes home ownership possible for first-time homeowners and actively manages over 8 million mortgages. Ginnie Mae is central to the stability of America's housing finance system, responsible for a portfolio of $2.6 trillion. So as you and I discussed, Secretary Turner, we share the goals here. We want people to have a roof over their heads. We want children to feel safe in their homes. We want homes to be livable. We want to have much higher standard housing available for more Americans. And I trust your commitment to those goals. I struggle with how we're going to meet those goals with the situation President Trump has created with regard to funding streams, with regard to staffing, with regard to all things HUD does. You'll have a massive challenge ahead of you. But I pledge to you, Chairwoman Hyde-Smith and Secretary Turner, I would like to work with you diligently on solving these massive problems. We have so many homeless children in New York. We have enough homeless teenage girls for multiple Girl Scout troops. Kids should not be growing up homeless in America. We are the richest country in the world. This is a failure, a moral and ethical failure. And as a pastor, I don't have to tell you about the Sermon on the Mount. We are called to do this work in multiple ways, not just as elected leaders, but people of faith and people of goodwill. So I trust you will work with me diligently on this for as long as you are HUD Secretary and as long as you are Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Secretary, we would love to hear your remarks.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman and Ranking Member Gillibrand. I really appreciate your opening testimonies, and I will say from the beginning that I do commit to working with you, and also want to say hello and thank you to all of the distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity today to testify in support of President Trump's 2026 budget for the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Members, we have a small window of opportunity to help every American achieve the dream of home ownership, and that clock is ticking. As of April of this year, the national median home price is $414,000, up from more than $341,000 in April of 2021, and this is an increase of more than 21%. It became very hard to own a home due to the policies of the Biden administration, which have been marked by negligence and a lack of stewardship of taxpayer resources. We can't keep running the same losing plays. It's time to run new plays, and I say that as the HUD Secretary, but also as a former athlete. We have to run plays that help us to be successful. And so this budget, the President's budget of 2026, is indeed that new playbook that we are proposing. The budget requests $43.5 billion for the department, funding critical programs and providing greater fiscal responsibility and restraint. It carries out President Trump's Day One directive to increase the supply of affordable housing. This budget supports HUD's mission, and we will maximize the budget that you all provide for us, no matter the amount given. We've been taking inventory at HUD, as I said during my confirmation, of every program, and we found that HUD's rental assistance to be full of waste, fraud, and abuse, broken, and really deviating from its original purpose of serving temporarily Americans that are in need. HUD's assistance is not supposed to be permanent. It should be a trampoline, not a hammock, not a resting place, if you will. It's supposed to be like a treadway, which is a temporary military bridge that is removed once obstacles are overcome. We also are eliminating radical political agendas and wasteful spending at HUD. For example, we identified $260 million in savings for taxpayers, canceled $4 million in DEI contracts, and recovered an additional $1.9 billion from inactive contracts that should have been closed out under the previous administration. We've seen that just pouring money into these programs only has fueled existing issues. Now we're reversing course to be efficient and to be effective, not to be bloated and bureaucratic as we have been. We're also undoing harmful regulations, including the Obama-Biden era affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which effectively turned HUD into a national zoning board. While cutting red tape is indeed important, so is increasing the housing stock and opportunities for first-time homebuyers. The Federal Housing Administration, FHA, as we know it, which insures mortgages on more than 7 million homes, has insured mortgages for more than 140,000 first-time homebuyers since January when President Trump returned to the White House. So that's good news. In addition, we're ending taxpayer-funded subsidies at HUD for all illegal aliens. But HUD is more than just about housing. We've streamlined the disaster recovery process to help funding get to the communities more quickly and efficiently. For our tribal communities, we announced a $2.2 million expansion of the Tribal HUD VASH program to address veteran homelessness. And for our rural communities in our country, we convened roundtables and discussed solutions for workforce housing. We're returning HUD to its intended purpose, serving Americans through localized solution. The President's budget continues this approach by limiting the size and the spending of federal programs. It proposes a state-based formula grant to encourage states to have skin in the game for the funding and design of their own rental assistance. The block grant process will empower states to be more thoughtful and to be more precise in their stewardship. HUD currently manages approximately 30,000 program awardees or recipients. No wonder the system is plagued by abuse. Empowering states through a reimagined grant system would prune this administrative burden while maintaining necessary assistance for the elderly and disabled, as stated in the budget language. The budget also continued HUD's commitment to promoting economic independence by adopting a compassionate, common sense, and historically bipartisan conversation around work requirements and time limits that will encourage able-bodied residents to move up and to move out of assisted housing. It also addresses our nation's homelessness crisis by welcoming efforts from faith-based service providers and supporting localized solutions that affirm addressing homelessness, and it goes far beyond housing. The President's budget would save billions of taxpayer dollars and help us to restore fiscal responsibility. In order to properly serve the American people, we must care about the mission and care about the ones that we do serve and the ones we've been called to serve, and that's who and what we are at HUD now. This 2026 budget request will allow us to operate at a standard of excellence as part of the President's golden age, and I'm proud to be here, proud to support it, and I'm looking forward, Madam Chair, for our conversation and to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to start the questioning process. I know the budget request speaks to rental assistance, but I would like to focus on housing production, especially affordable housing. There's a lot of players involved in increasing the housing supply, including local, state, and federal governments, banks, commercial developers, and nonprofit organizations. These entities can be involved in regulatory oversight, funding through grants and loans, or a combination of both. As this is your first time before the committee, I'd like to put a quarter in the machine, so to speak, and let you talk about how the administration sees the role of the federal government in increasing housing supply relative to other actors, and then secondly, HUD's role relative to other federal entities.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First, one of our first priorities was to look at the regulatory environment. And, burdensome regulations have really crippled home building in our country. From a federal level, I made mention of the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule, which we took down to restore flexibility back to localities, back to states. And also, when you look at some of the burdensome regulations on our local level, where builders and developers, 40% of building a multifamily project is regulation. 20 to 25% of building a single-family project is in regulations. And so tearing down and making those regulations easing the burden will unleash the creativity, unleash the ingenuity of our developers and private builders around our country. We need about 7 million units of housing in our country, multifamily, single-family, manufactured housing, duplexes, condos. And so, having said that, Secretary Burgum and I from the Department of Interior signed a joint task force MOU to identify underutilized federal lands, about 500 million acres the Department of Interior has, and to look at those and say, where can we build more housing around our country on our federal lands while protecting our national forests, while protecting our national parks and the beauty of our country, but utilizing this land to build more affordable housing and all types of housing. Also, HUD is, as you know, the leader and holds the code for manufactured homes. Manufactured homes are a great alternative, if you will, in building homes, affordable homes around our country. And so we're working very hard to make sure that those codes are up to date, as a lot of codes need to be up to date. But manufactured housing is also one thing that we can do from a HUD standpoint to increase the housing supply. So in summation, taking down the regulatory environment, the MOU we have with Department of Interior, the manufactured housing, and also restoring flexibility and control and creativity, if you will, back to localities.
And Secretary Turner, I've spoken with you before about my Respect State Housing Laws Act, which would repeal a section of the pandemic-era CARES Act of 2020 that continues to require many landlords and property owners to issue a 30-day notice to vacate before filing to evict a tenant for non-payment of rent. As you know, we're no longer facing a pandemic. This supposedly temporary eviction provision needs to end and return the statute to its pre-COVID requirements. However, on December the 13th of 2024, HUD published a final rule titled 30-Day Notification Requirements Prior to Termination of Lease for Non-Payment of Rent. The rule requires tenants to receive a written notice at least 30 days before a formal judicial eviction is filed to non-payment of rent if they live in public housing or one of the several project-based rental assistance properties. Will you rescind this rule to return eviction policies back to the state and local level in order to help housing providers meet their financial obligations and continue to provide affordable housing? And if you plan to rescind this harmful rule, when will you do it?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, housing affordability is of utmost priority for myself and our team at HUD. And to answer your question, this issue has been raised to us, and I know that we are committed to working with you and your staff to make sure that this issue is resolved. And so, yes, ma'am, I commit to working with you to make sure that housing is affordable again, and you best be assured that we've talked about this and the issue has been addressed.
Thank you. And the last one for right now is, like other agencies across the government, HUD programs, especially in the case of rental assistance, can be a high-risk area for improper payments. In some cases, rental subsidies exceed what a household is eligible to receive, and in other cases, the payments are too low. And while the GAO notes that reducing improper payments is critical to safeguarding federal funds and could help achieve cost savings, the HUD Office of Inspector General reported last month that the department is unable to estimate improper payments for the tenant-based and project-based Section 8 programs. its two largest rental assistance programs. In April, the acting IG testified that HUD has uniquely struggled to identify and mitigate the risk of improper payments. Mr. Secretary, how is HUD prioritizing fixes to its improper payments problem, and what step will the new leadership in the Office of Chief Financial Officer, Public and Indian Housing, and the Office of Housing be taking this year to resolve the GAO and the IG concerns?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, we have the best CFO in the country, and Mr. Irv Dennis, who was in the previous administration with Dr. Carson. We had clean audits during Dr. Carson's tenure here, and now, we do have a bit of a issue on our hands, but having Irv Dennis back and his team in the CFO's office and our Office of PIH and Housing, they are doing a top-to-bottom review of this improper payment issue, and it will get resolved, and we will be in compliance, and we look forward to hearing from you and the committee and working with you on this, but Irv Dennis and his team are on top of this. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. The other committee that I have a leadership role on is the Senate Aging Committee. And you know how important housing is to our older Americans. Seniors are the fastest growing age group among people experiencing homelessness. Over 41,000 seniors age 65 and older experienced homelessness at the time of the 2024 point-in-time count, and that number could triple by the year 2030. The budget, however, cuts HUD homeless assistance by 13%, and you propose strict time limits even for seniors. These are people with fixed incomes, can't work, face very increasing healthcare costs and challenges, and need wraparound services to stay housed. So, Mr. Secretary, under your proposal, what happens to the seniors currently being served in permanent supportive housing, and what's your ambition with regard to addressing homelessness amongst our older Americans?
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. I appreciate our conversation yesterday. And as you will note in the budget, the language in the budget prioritizes our seniors, our elderly and disabled, and our veterans. And so we are well aware of this. And at HUD, we will continue to prioritize our seniors. You alluded to the homelessness in our country. And I want to make note for the committee, with record funding from HUD, HUD's budget over the last 8 years went from approximately $42 billion to $77 billion. And yet homelessness is at an all-time high, went up 18% last year with over 770,000 people homeless at one single night in January of 2024. And when I look at this, obviously with this type of funding and with the role that we do have, that's unacceptable. As you know, I was just in New York City, visiting New York City and NYCHA, the Public Housing Authority there, which has many problems as it pertains to stewardship, as it pertains to fraud and abuse, and authorities there, leadership there, being indicted. And, homelessness, we've made it very hard for faith-based institutions to work with the government, to work with HUD in particular. And when I visit cities around our country and you see the faith-based institutions that are actually doing the work every day as it pertains to homelessness, we need to partner with these institutions, partner with the nonprofits that actually have data-driven results to decrease homelessness, to not only get people off the streets, but also to help people be transformed when you think about drug addiction, mental health, the restoration of the family, the faith. And so that's my approach to it, Senator, is to have a holistic approach and better stewardship, if you will, and to bring in these partnerships so that we can eradicate homelessness on our streets. But the budget language does prioritize our elderly and our disabled.
Thank you. And I would like to work with you on perhaps new legislative language about increasing the ability to do partnerships, faith-based partnerships. As I mentioned to you yesterday, there's a not-for-profit in the Bronx called the Fortune Society. And I would love you to tour that because they deal with formerly incarcerated men, which is a very critical population that are at risk for homelessness. Not only do they house them, they give them skills training, they give them mental health support, they give them any substance use disorder prevention that's necessary, and they holistically look at these individuals and say, how do we make sure that you get on your feet, that you have a great job and you can pay for your own housing, and what does it take to get you from the day you are released to the day you are self-sufficient? And I would love to work with you on legislation to accomplish those goals in whatever ways we can, because again, the failure of this country not to house Americans is painful, and we have to do a better job, and I'm open to all solutions, and I'd love to work with the chairwoman on that. The second issue that I raised with you that I wanted to raise for the committee is, what do we do with all the buildings that are empty in cities like New York? There are so many commercial buildings that no one is going to work in anymore, that are entirely unutilized, and I would like to work on legislation to provide conversions, to be able to create resources and also authorities so that we can make it easier to take empty buildings and transform them into critical housing needs. Now, the type of critical housing needs that I would make this eligible for is certainly for formerly homeless. I think we have to get out of the model that homeless people are going to shelters. They should be going to permanent housing with the transitional wraparound services like the Fortune Society offers for this one group of people, like some of the shelters offer for battered women and their children. So the kinds of services that get people on their feet so they can be self-sufficient. And there's going to be a lot of important things we need to look at to make conversions possible. And I also would like your commitment that you will work with me on that to get legislation written and supported to get the resources and the authorities to do that kind of work.
Yes, ma'am. I look forward to working with you on these two issues that you raised. Thank you.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair, and thank you, Secretary. First of all, appreciate our team's working relationship as Maui continues to try to recover, which starts with housing. So I appreciate that good working relationship. I just wanted to touch upon your testimony regarding reducing regulatory barriers. I've sort of, over the last, 5 to 8 years or so, been radicalized on the extent to which there really are regulatory barriers, and they really are an impediment to building enough housing for everybody, not just affordable housing, capital A, capital H, but housing for everybody. And I agree with you, there are federal barriers, but the truth is, if you talk to any developer, and this 20 to 40% of the cost of a home being regulations, most of those regulations are at the local level. So I guess the first thing I'd like you to do is just speak to where the federal government cannot sort of override, it's my dream, override zoning locally. I would get exactly 3 votes in the Senate for that, so I understand. But not to override it, not to come over the top, but to nudge them in the right direction. And then secondly, I want to talk about the pro-housing program. I have some pride of authorship. It was my thing when I was chair of this subcommittee. And I understand it's sort of gotten caught up in this DEI question, plus there's budgetary pressure. But I want to get that relaunched with you because I do think it's the most significant pro-housing deregulatory mechanism that we've passed. Maybe there are other things that we can do in the future or that we should have done in the past, but this thing is a big pot of money to incentivize states and counties to kind of unravel this labyrinth that we've created for ourselves. So I'd like your comments on both matters.
Well, thank you, Senator. And yes, it's been good to work with you and your staff for your constituents there, and I look forward to being with you there at some time. The regulatory environment, I mentioned the AFFH rule that we tore down as far as HUD being a national zoning board. That restores the flexibility back to the locality. So from our standpoint, from the federal side, to restore that back to them is one step. The second step is, as the HUD Secretary, and as I travel, and this is what I have been doing, so I'm bringing you real time. What I have been doing is I travel around the cities and meet with stakeholders, when I meet with local officials, mayors, economic development authorities and things of this people of this nature, is to encourage them to, as we are doing from a federal side, to take inventory of their regulatory environment, to take inventory of their restrictions, what's causing the restrictions in their localities that is keeping people from building, keeping developers from building, and not only identify the problem, but do something about the problem. And so that has proven to seem to be very effective thus far. And so to answer your questions, taking down a regulatory environment from HUD standpoint and encouraging localities from their standpoint to do the same. I believe that if we continually do this, that will help unleash the flexibility and the freedom for developers to build. Again, we need 7 million units.
Sure,
And developers want to build. They just need the government to take their hands off of them from a federal and state.
This is one of the only areas where politicians create a shortage of something on purpose and then stroke their chins wondering why there's not enough of it. But I guess the point I wanted to make to you, Mr. Secretary, is that, I have some colleagues who are sort of waking up to how much of a problem regulatory barriers are specifically at the zoning level, restrictive covenants, minimum lot sizes, all of that stuff, which was essentially the sort of great-grandson of post-Jim Crow real estate law. And as they evolve and they think about the policy tools, they basically reinvent the thing that we have annually in the THUD mark for the last, I think it's now 3 years. And so this program induces, it doesn't just provide planning grants, it induces, with a small financial incentive, counties to sort of get off their butts and do the thing. So I just want to keep working on this. And I understand that you and I may have a disagreement about what constitutes woke or DEI or whatever, and there were some racial equity criteria in the grant announcements that I understand Donald Trump is president, he's not going to go for that, and fair enough, you won. But the core of the bill and the core of the program does not hinge on that particular question, and you could restart it sort of in your own vision, and I'd be really pleased to see it be restarted because it was always a bipartisan priority. It's a real innovative program. The THUD mark doesn't allow you a lot of flexibility to do cool stuff and innovate. You just kind of have to go, okay, here's our capital expenses for public housing authorities, here's our the home program, and they're all so important and so underfunded. You don't get to do a lot of new things. This is an area where we did a new thing, and it was really starting to make progress. So I encourage you to look at restarting it as quickly as you can.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Murray.
Thank you very much, Chair Hyde-Smith, Senator Gillibrand. Good to work with both of you on this committee. Secretary Turner, welcome. The entire point of your department is to help Americans keep a roof over their head. Mm-hmm. I am really afraid that pretty much everything that you and President Trump have done to date appears kind of in direct opposition to that goal. First off, the president's illegal funding freezes are causing chaos across the country. I was in Everett, in my home state of Washington, a few weeks ago. I was talking to organizations that help people find housing, and if they can't get their already awarded funding, they will be forced to start evicting people this summer and may even have to shut down their services altogether. And on top of that, you're pushing out 2,300 staff who are dedicated public servants with decades of experience. And I just don't see how you can tell us with a straight face that forcing out over a quarter of your workforce is going to have no effect on your department's ability to meet its statutory responsibilities under law. And now, after all the damage that's been done, you're here today requesting that Congress slash funding for your department nearly in half. Nearly in half. That would force millions of Americans out of their homes. Your request would force states to make up for the draconian cuts and abdication of responsibility. And I don't know what state can afford to do that, especially when this administration is simultaneously working to shift even more costs to states for things like SNAP and health care. It is kind of absurd to claim that we cannot afford basic programs that keep people off the streets, but we can hand trillions of dollars in new tax cuts to billionaires and big corporations. Housing affordability and homelessness is a crisis in Washington State and in many places across the country. You know that. But this administration just appears to me to be trying to make it all worse. And I'll tell you right now, looking at your budget request, as far as I'm concerned, as vice chair of this committee, it's not going anywhere. I want to start with the funding that you are illegally freezing. The Continuum of Care program is essential to addressing homelessness in my home state of Washington. In March, HUD began issuing grant agreements with a host of new conditions that are deeply concerning and completely unrelated to HUD's mission. HUD did so Did that without notice and without any explanation of what the vaguely worded conditions mean or what a grantee would be required to do. As I said earlier, organizations I have talked to in my state say that without these funds, they're going to evict people this summer. The courts, as you know, are sorting this out. I'm glad to see that they have extended the preliminary injunction to stop HUD from enforcing these new and extreme requirements. But Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you, are you going to, and I quote from the court order, take every step necessary to effectuate this order, including clearing any administrative, operational, or technical hurdles to implementation?
Thank you, Madam Senator. Great to meet you. As you have said, this is under active litigation, and so we'll leave it there. And once this is through litigation, I look forward to having a conversation, but right now I won't comment on it.
Not even to tell us if you're following the court order?
I will follow the law, but I won't
I'm
mention
asking if you're-
anymore
I'm
for it's
asking you-
under active litigation.
Are you following the court order?
Our team follows the law and the court order, yes, ma'am.
Are you in full compliance with the court order?
I'm not going to speak anymore on it because it's an active litigation.
That you can't even tell us?
You know, the other thing that I wanted to mention to you.
Well, let me just follow up on this. When will you be in full compliance with the court order? Are funds being withheld today?
We will be with you as soon as we can once it's done with active litigation.
So are funds being withheld right now, even though the court order is in place?
You know, you talked about the 2,300 people.
So, Mr. Secretary, I just want you to know, I'm talking about this continuum care because I am hearing from providers in my state that funds are being withheld, meaning you are not in compliance. Are you aware of that?
Ma'am, I am aware of the litigation, yes, ma'am. It's an active litigation, Senator.
Yeah, and I'm hearing that funds are still being withheld despite the court order. So I need to know if you know that, and if you're going to make sure that the funds are released.
Yes, ma'am, I'm the secretary, and so things that go on at HUD I'm well aware of, but I also know with this active litigation that I'm not going to say very much in our hearing today, but happy to talk to you as time goes on and as I'm able to.
Well,
I commit to that.
Yeah, well, we are running out of time. They're going to start evicting people, and they need those funds. I want to move on to another example because I just haven't.
Can I address the 2,300 people right quick?
Well, you're just going to, okay, you got 10 seconds because I need to talk to you
All
about
right,
a specific
I'll take 10.
program.
So just to clarify, the 2,300 people that left HUD, it was voluntary. They were not forced out.
I know. I've been hearing that from every secretary that comes before.
Well, no, ma'am. This is just me from HUD, and I'm just telling you, it's
I know,
2,300 that they took the
2,300 that were
DRP.
told if you don't get out now, you're going to be sorry in the future. So it is people that we need there. Anyway, let me move on to another example. Your Green and Resilient Retrofit Program, that was created to help make properties more resilient to disasters and less expensive to heat and cool. On day one, you and the President deemed this common sense program woke somehow and have illegally attempted to terminate it. The courts have now directed HUD to process and disperse those funds. But I want you to know we are hearing from owners that HUD is doing nothing to restore the administrative contract that DOJ canceled, which is holding up this deal from moving forward. This committee has now asked 5 times for HUD to brief my staff on this, yet they've refused to speak to us about basic legal requirements. So let me just ask you here today, why are you preventing HUD-assisted property owners from making overdue upgrades to low-income and senior housing?
Again, Senator, this also is under active litigation, as you know, and so my comments on this will be 0 to limited. It's under active litigation. As soon as we get done with that, I'm happy to speak with you.
Well, there are people waiting, and this fund's critical, and there are court orders. I expect them to be followed. And I'm just going to say for the record, there is nothing objectionable about this funding. It is stunning to me that we are under a court order and you're not giving the money out. It's for things like replacing windows and outdated HVAC systems, installing fire-resistant roofs. These are things that are badly needed for people in this country, and I am out of time, so thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, ma'am.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chair Hyde-Smith and Ranking Member Gillibrand, Secretary Turner. Welcome. Thank you for the chance to be with you today. I appreciated receiving, finally, your budget submission. and I look forward to getting to know you better and to work with you. I'll just mention right at the outset, Madam Chair, that my week had a positive start because I got to visit a project built by a faith-based organization from the Mennonite community to address youth aging out of foster care in a rural community known as Greenwood, Delaware. And I'm pleased, as are you, that the youth aging out of foster care program will be sustained. But I'm gravely concerned that several of the tools that were used to make that project work are not being continued. I was a county executive. I spent 6 years of my life working on housing. We were responsible for the second largest housing authority in my state. The housing authority didn't own any units. It was all private sector, private landlords, but working in partnership with us and with HUD. And I'm working on a bipartisan piece of legislation with Senator Kramer of North Dakota called the Choice in Affordable Housing Act. And it would make housing choice vouchers more accessible. It would do a better job of attracting and retaining private sector landlords to the program. It's got a wide range of groups involved in housing production, housing advocacy, supporting it. And I'd like you to commit to working with me on that legislation to see if we can make progress on improving the Housing Choice Vouchers program. Is that something you'd be willing to work with me on?
Thank you, Senator. It's great to see you, sir. And I do look forward to seeing the language and hearing from you and your staff and how we can work together. Obviously, the housing affordability is a top priority of mine, and taking care of American people and also people, to see people live lives of self-sustainability. And for the youth aging out of foster care, I'm looking forward to working with this committee and also with the First Lady as we take care of our youth to make sure that they land on solid ground in the days ahead.
Well, you heard from Senator Gillibrand, and I'll repeat the same thing, a passion on my part for working on the conversion of formerly commercial buildings to residential buildings. I'm close with a developer in Delaware that's done that a number of times successfully. As Senator Gillibrand knows, it's very difficult to do. Some properties lend themselves to it easily. Some properties are almost impossible. We have a significant challenge nationally. We are not producing enough affordable housing. We're not producing enough housing in urban centers. We're not producing enough housing in rural areas. And taking underutilized or vacant commercial properties and appropriately transitioning them to housing for those who are either homeless, unhoused, or underhoused is another thing I'd love to work with you on. But I must say, just right off the top, that I looked at this budget. You are a person of faith, as are the rest of us on this panel. You share a commitment to caring for our vulnerable neighbors, the least of these. But this budget, Mr. Secretary, is not a serious proposal. It does not meet the urgent housing needs of our country. A 50% cut to all the programs at HUD would be devastating to families and goes well beyond right-sizing a bloated agency, which was your phraseology. I think it takes a chainsaw to programs that I've worked with for years and that I've seen help the neediest Americans. As county executive, I relied on the home program. I've worked closely with the SHOP Sweat Equity program. I've supported and worked closely with the Continuum of Care program, whether it's HOPWA or housing for the elderly or housing for persons with disabilities. The solution to eliminating all of these services and then rolling them up into a new block grant program, I will assert, Mr. Secretary, will simply shift the burden onto states and counties. States and counties will end up being forced to pick up services for people who will become newly unhoused. That may not be your intention, but it is certainly my intention to test and push and challenge some of the assumptions underlying this. The administration is shifting the burden onto states and counties for a lot of other programming, for food assistance, healthcare, education, and that will badly strain state and county budgets. To also move housing affordability for seniors, for the disabled, for families with children, I think goes beyond streamlining HUD services, but leads to fewer people receiving services. Let me just talk a little bit more about CDBG and home. As county executive, home was absolutely critical to our working in partnership with local nonprofits, several of them faith-based. It required a non-federal match, a robust non-federal match. It allowed us to build affordable housing, especially for disabled folks in our county. It helped 44,500 individuals a year. Do you actually believe state and local governments have the ability to pick up the costs for services that will be shifted to them if all of these programs are eliminated?
Thank you, Senator. And I appreciate your perspective on everything, and thank you to your service, both locally and here nationally. Senator, HUD has record funding, and currently we're only able to serve 1 out of 4 eligible families with $77 billion. Mm-hmm. And I alluded to this before, and I will say again, we have to do something different, because what we have been doing over these many years has not been working. Stewardship has to be a priority. There's a lot of waste, there's a lot of fraud, there's a lot of abuse in our system. And we can't, when I alluded to saying, you can't keep running the same plays, what I mean there's the best teams that I've seen in my career are the teams that make adjustments. We can't keep running the same play because it's causing us to lose. Well, that's what I feel like in America today, in particular with HUD, we've been running plays that have caused us to lose. And so, sir, this is a different way of looking at things. It's a rethinking of how can we get states to have skin in the game. I do realize, I understand the responsibility that you speak of, but this is a way for states to identify their unique needs and then to distribute their funds as they see fit. They can identify those that have been successful and fund those. And so it's a way for the states to uniquely get involved, to be very deliberate and decisive of their stewardship. And so, sir, that's the paradigm that I'm talking about. That's the culture shift I'm talking about. It's a new way of looking at it, a new way of rethinking it. The home program, to be honest, over the last 33 years has built 1.3 million units. That's only 32 units a year. And it provides gap funding, but the other funding has been $185 billion. So I think we have to look at this in a different way and do it better.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes, sir.
with all due respect, I welcome and appreciate some fresh thinking or a new look, a new attitude, but cutting funding by 50%, cutting the HUD workforce by a third is not going to produce any significant increase in housing production. You can reorganize, you can right-size, you can reanalyze existing programs. I would reject the assertion that the home program, as administered in my county, was rife with waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm not going to defend every home program in every county in America because I can't, but I know the ones I was responsible for. I met with the Delaware home builders earlier today. Many of the folks in the room I've known for decades. One of them is among the leading builders of quality, affordable multifamily housing in America. And they probably don't want me to quote them right now. But their comment was the staffing cuts that you've pushed through this agency, reducing by a third the total headcount, means that getting projects approved that have to have an approval, a sign-off on a mortgage or a sign-off on a project approval, their wait times have gone from months to projects not moving forward, falling apart. And they cited to me the potentially disastrous consequences for low-income housing tax credit projects, for home projects, for Section 232 and 202 projects, of having all the staff with experience and expertise managing these gone, and then all the funding shoved into one big pile and sort of pushed at the states to say, you come up with your priorities. In the room full of folks I just met with who have decades of experience building housing of all kinds, high-end, mid, low, multifamily, single-family, inner-city, rural. These are guys who represent the whole scope of the home building industry in my state. They were not optimistic that working together, we were going to generate more housing. And I'll say one last point on one comment, if I might. Senator from Rhode Island, senator from Hawaii, senator from Delaware. The idea that we're going to solve this problem by accessing federal lands, that doesn't build you one single unit of housing in my state. East Coast, there's not a whole lot of relevant vacant federal land. Right. And I dare say, although these are not my states or my geography, in states like, Wyoming or Montana or Utah, my hunch is the infrastructure cost to connect out to and build on available vacant federal land may not pencil out. Let me conclude. I'm way over, and I apologize, Madam Chair, but I was the last, so I figured I'd take a little moment. Thank you for what you've said today about the values you bring to this work and about working together to find the right balance. And thank you for your willingness to take on a challenging department at an important time. But bluntly, Mr. Secretary, I think we need to produce more housing, not less. And I look forward to working with you to try to find ways to do that in keeping with our charge of stewardship. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Without objection, this letter from the First Lady Melania Trump in support of the Foster Youth Independence Initiative will be entered into the record. And if there are no further questions, senators may submit additional questions for the subcommittee's official hearing record. We request your responses within 30 days. The subcommittee stands in recess, subject to call of the chair.
Thank you, ma'am.